Chapter 1 of Louise de la Valliere. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Snoza, Houston, Texas, February 2013. Louise de la Valliere by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 1, Malaga. During all these long and noisy debates between the opposite ambitions of politics and love, one of our characters, perhaps the one least deserving of neglect, was, however, very much neglected, very much forgotten, and exceedingly unhappy. In fact, D'Artagnan we say, for we must call him by his name to remind our readers of his existence. D'Artagnan, we repeat, had absolutely nothing whatever to do amidst these brilliant butterflies of fashion. After following the king during 2 whole days at Fontainebleau, and critically observing the various pastoral fancies and heroic comic transformations of his sovereign, the musketeer felt that he needed something more than this to satisfy the cravings of his nature. At every moment assailed by people asking him, "How do you think this costume suits me, Monsieur d'Artagnan?" he would reply to them in quiet, sarcastic tones, "Why, I think you're quite as well dressed as the best-dressed monkey to be found at the fair at Saint Laurent." It was just such a compliment D'Artagnan would choose when he did not feel disposed to pay any other, and whether agreeable or not, the inquirer was obliged to be satisfied with it. Whenever anyone asked him, "How do you intend to dress yourself this evening?" he replied, "I shall undress myself," at which the ladies all laughed, and a few of them blushed. But after a couple of days passed in this manner, the musketeer, perceiving that nothing serious was likely to arise which would concern him, and that the king had completely, or at least appeared to have completely forgotten Paris, Saint-Mandé, and Belle-Isle, that Monsieur Colbert's mind was occupied with illuminations and fireworks, that for the next month at least the ladies had plenty of glances to bestow, and also to receive in exchange, D'Artagnan asked the king for leave of absence for a matter of private business. At the moment D'Artagnan made his request, his Majesty was on the point of going to bed, quite exhausted from dancing. "You wish to leave me, Monsieur d'Artagnan?" inquired the king, with an air of astonishment, for Louis XIV could never understand why anyone who had the distinguished honor of being near him could wish to leave him. "Sire," said D'Artagnan, "I leave you simply because I am not of the slightest service to you in anything. Ah, if I could only hold the balancing pole while you are dancing, it would be a very different affair." "But, my dear Monsieur d'Artagnan," said the king gravely, "people dance without balancing poles." "Ah, indeed," said the musketeer, continuing his imperceptible tone of irony. "I had no idea such a thing was possible." "You have not seen me dance, then?" inquired the king. "Yes, but I always thought dancers went from easy to difficult acrobatic feats. I was mistaken. All the more greater reason, therefore, that I should leave for a time. Sire, I repeat, you have no present occasion for my services. Besides, if your Majesty should have any need of me, you would know where to find me." "Very well," said the king, and he granted him leave of absence. "We shall not look for D'Artagnan, therefore, at Fontainebleau, for to do so would be useless, but with the permission of our readers, follow him to the Rue de Lombard, where he was located at the sign of the Pilon d'Or, in the house of our old friend Planchet. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and the weather was exceedingly warm. There was only one window open, and that one belonging to a room on the entresol. A perfume of spices mingled with another perfume less exotic, but more penetrating, namely, that which arose from the street, ascended to salute the nostrils of the musketeer. D'Artagnan, reclining in an immense straight-backed chair, with his legs not stretched out, but simply placed upon a stool, formed an angle of the most obtuse form that could possibly be seen. Both his arms were crossed over his head reclining upon his left shoulder like Alexander the Great. His eyes, usually so quick and intelligent in their expression, were now half closed, and seemed fastened, as it were, upon a small corner of blue sky that was visible behind the opening of the chimneys. There was just enough blue, and no more, to fill one of the sacks of lentils or haricots which formed the principal furniture of the shop on the ground floor. Thus extended at his ease, and sheltered in his place of observation behind the window, D'Artagnan seemed as if he had ceased to be a soldier, as if he were no longer an officer belonging to the palace, but was, in the contrary, a quiet, easy-going citizen in a state of stagnation between his dinner and supper, or between his supper and his bed, one of those strong, ossified brains which have no more room for a single idea. So fiercely does animal matter keep watch at the doors of intelligence, narrowly inspecting the contraband trade which might result from the introduction into the brain of a symptom of thought. We have already said night was closing in. The shops were being lighted, while the windows of the upper apartments were being closed, and the rhythmic steps of a patrol of soldiers forming the night watch could be heard retreating. D'Artagnan continued, however, to think of nothing except the blue corner of the sky. A few paces from him, completely in the shade, lying on his stomach upon a sack of Indian corn, was Planchet, with both arms under his chin, and his eyes fixed on D'Artagnan, who was either thinking, dreaming, or sleeping, with his eyes open. Planchet had been watching him for a tolerably long time, and by way of interruption, he began by exclaiming, "Hum." But D'Artagnan did not stir. Planchet then saw it was necessary to have recourse to more effectual means still. After a prolonged reflection on the subject, the most ingenious means that suggested itself to him under the present circumstances was to let himself roll off the sack onto the floor, murmuring at the same time against himself the word "stupid." But, notwithstanding the noise produced by Planchet's fall, D'Artagnan, who had in the course of his existence heard many other and very different falls, did not appear to pay the least attention to the present one. Besides, an enormous cart laden with stones passing from the Rue Saint-Médéric absorbed in the noise of its wheels the noise of Planchet's tumble, and yet Planchet fancied that, in token of tacit approval, he saw him imperceptibly smile at the word "stupid." This emboldened him to say, "Are you asleep, Monsieur d'Artagnan?" "No, Planchet, I am not even asleep," replied the Musketeer. "I am in despair," said Planchet, "to hear such a word as even." "Well, and why not? Is it not a grammatical word, Monsieur Planchet?" "Of course, Monsieur d'Artagnan." "Well?" "Well, then, the word distresses me beyond measure." "Tell me why you are distressed, Planchet," said D'Artagnan. "If you say that you are not even asleep, it is as much to say that you have not even the consolation of being able to sleep, or better still, it is precisely the same as telling me that you are getting bored to death." "Planchet, you know that I am never bored." "Except today, and the day before yesterday." "Bah! Monsieur d'Artagnan, it is a week since you returned here from Fontainebleau. In other words, you have no longer your orders to issue, or your men to review and maneuver. You need the sound of guns, drums, and all that din of confusion. I, who have myself carried a musket, can easily believe that." "Planchet," replied D'Artagnan, "I assure you that I am not bored in the least in the world." "In that case, what are you doing, lying there as if you were dead?" "My dear Planchet, there was once upon a time, at the siege of La Rochelle, when I was there, when you were there, when we both were there, a certain Arab who was celebrated for the manner in which he adjusted culverins. He was a clever fellow, although of a very odd complexion, which was the same color as your olives. Well, this Arab, whenever he had done eating or working, used to sit down to rest himself, as I am resting myself now, and smoked I cannot tell you what sort of magical leaves, in a large amber-mouthed tube, and if any officers, happening to pass, reproached him for being always asleep, he used to quietly reply, 'Better to sit down than to stand up, to lie down than to sit down, to be dead than to lie down.' He was an acutely melancholy Arab, and I remember him perfectly well, from the color of his skin and the style of his conversation. He used to cut off the heads of Protestants with the most singular gusto." "Precisely, and then he used to embalm them when they were worth the trouble, and when he was thus engaged with his herbs and plants around him, he looked like a basket-maker making baskets." "You are quite right, Planchet, he did. Oh, I can remember things very well at times." "I have no doubt of it, but what do you think of his mode of reasoning?" "I think it is good in one sense, but very stupid in another." "Expound your meaning, Monsieur Planchet." "Well, monsieur, in point of fact, then, better to sit down than to stand up is plain enough, especially when one may be fatigued. and Planchet smiled in a roguish way. As for better to be lying down, let that pass. But for the last proposition, that is, better to be dead than alive, it is, in my opinion, very absurd, my own undoubted preference being for my bed, and if you are not of my opinion, it is simply, as I have already had the honor of telling you, because you are boring yourself to death. Planchet, do you know Monsieur de La Fontaine, the chemist at the corner of the Rue Saint-Médéric? No, the writer of fables. Oh, Maître Corbeau! Exactly. Well then, I am like his hare. He has got a hare also, then? He has all sorts of animals. Well, what does his hare do, then? Monsieur La Fontaine's hare thinks. Ah! Planchet, I am like that hare. I am thinking. What are you thinking, you say? Said Planchet uneasily. You are thinking, you say? Said Planchet uneasily. Yes, your house is dull enough to drive people to think. You will admit that, I hope. And yet, monsieur, you have a lookout upon the street. Yes, and wonderfully interesting that is, of course. But it is no less true, monsieur, that if you were living at the back of the house, you would bore yourself. I mean, you would think more than ever. Upon my word, Planchet, I hardly know that. Still, said the grocer, if your reflections are at all like those which led you to restore King Charles II, and Planchet finished with a little laugh that was not without its meaning. Ah, Planchet, my friend, returned D'Artagnan, you are getting ambitious. Is there no other king to be restored, Monsieur d'Artagnan? No second monk to be packed up like a salted hog in a deal-box? No, my dear Planchet, all the kings are seated on their respective thrones, less comfortably so, perhaps, than I am upon this chair, but in all events there they are, and D'Artagnan sighed deeply. Monsieur d'Artagnan, said Planchet, you are making me very uneasy. You are very good, Planchet. I begin to suspect something. What is it? Monsieur d'Artagnan, you are getting thin. Oh, said D'Artagnan, striking his chest, which sounded like an empty cuirass. It is impossible, Planchet. Ah, said Planchet, slightly overcome, if you were to get thin in my house, well, I should do something rash. What would you do? Tell me. I should look out for the man who was the cause of all your anxieties. According to your account, I am anxious now. Yes, you are anxious, and you are getting thin, visibly getting thin, Malaga. If you go on getting thin in this way, I will take my sword in my hand and go straight to Monsieur d'Herblay and have it out with him. What? Said Monsieur d'Artagnan, starting in his chair. What's that you say? And what has Monsieur d'Herblay's name got to do with your groceries? Just as you please. Get angry if you like, or call me names if you prefer it. But the deuce is in it. I know what I know. D'Artagnan had, during this second outburst of Planchet's, so placed himself as not to lose a single look on his face. That is, he sat with both his hands resting on both his knees, and his head stretched out toward the grocer. Come, explain yourself, he said, and tell me how you could possibly utter such a blasphemy. Monsieur d'Herblay, your old master, my friend, an ecclesiastic, a musketeer turned bishop, what do you mean to say you would raise your sword against him, Planchet? I could raise my sword against my own father when I see you in such a state as you are now. Monsieur d'Herblay, a gentleman. It is all the same to me whether he's a gentleman or not. He gives you the blue devils, and that is all I know, and the blue devils make people get thin. Malaga. I have no notion of Monsieur d'Artagnan leaving my house thinner than when he entered it. How does he give me the blue devils, as you call it? Come, explain, explain. You have had the nightmare during the last 3 nights. I? Yes, you. And in your nightmare you called out several times, Aramis, deceitful Aramis. I said that, did I? Murmured D'Artagnan uneasily. Yes, those very words, upon my honor. Well, what else? You know the saying, Planchet, dreams go by contraries. Not so, for every time during the last 3 days when you were out, you have not once failed to ask me, on your return, have you seen Monsieur d'Herblay? Or else, have you received any letters for me from Monsieur d'Herblay? Well, it is very natural I should take an interest in my old friend, said D'Artagnan. Of course. but not to such an extent as to get thin on that account. Planchet, I'll get fatter. I give you my word of honor, I will. Very well, monsieur, I accept it. For I know that when you give your word of honor, it is sacred. I will not dream of Aramis any more, and I will never ask you again if there are any letters from Monsieur d'Herblay, but on condition that you explain one thing to me. What is it, monsieur? I am a great observer, and just now you made use of a very singular oath, which is unusual for you. You mean Malaga, I suppose? Precisely. It is the oath I have used ever since I have been a grocer. Very proper, too. It is the name of a dried grape or raisin, I believe. It is my most ferocious oath. When I have once said Malaga, I am a man no longer. Still, I never knew you to use that oath before. Very likely not, monsieur. I had a present made me of it, said Planchet, and as he pronounced these words, he winked his eye with a cunning expression, which thoroughly awakened D'Artagnan's attention. Come, come, Monsieur Planchet. Why, I am not like you, monsieur, said Planchet. I don't pass my life in thinking. You do wrong, then. I meant in boring myself to death. We have but a very short time to live. Why not make the best of it? You are an Epicurean philosopher, I begin to think, Planchet. Why not? My hand is still as steady as ever. I can write, and I can weigh out my sugar and spices. My foot is firm. I can dance and walk about. My stomach has its teeth still, for I eat and digest very well. My heart is not quite hardened. Well, monsieur? Well, what, Planchet? Why, you see, said the grocer, rubbing his hands together. D'Artagnan crossed one leg over the other, and said, Planchet, my friend, I am unnerved with extreme surprise, for you are revealing yourself to me under a perfectly new light. Planchet, flattered to the highest degree by this remark, continued to rub his hands very hard together. Ah, he said, because I happen to be slow, you think me perhaps a positive fool. Very good, Planchet, very well reasoned. Follow my idea, monsieur, if you please. I said to myself, continued Planchet, that without enjoyment there is no happiness on this earth. Quite true what you say, Planchet, interrupted D'Artagnan. At all events, if we cannot obtain pleasure, for pleasure is not so common a thing after all, let us at least get consolation of some kind or another. And so you console yourself? Exactly so. Tell me how you console yourself. I put on a buckler for the purpose of confronting ennui. I place my time at the direction of patience, and on the very eve of feeling I am going to get bored, I amuse myself. And you don't find any difficulty in that? None. And you found it out quite by yourself? Oh, quite so. It is miraculous. What do you say? I say that your philosophy is not to be matched in the Christian or pagan world, in modern days or in antiquity. You think so? Follow my example, then. It is a very tempting one. Do as I do. I could not wish for anything better, but all minds are not of the same stamp, and it might possibly happen that if I were required to amuse myself in the manner that you do, I should bore myself horribly. Bah! At least try first. Well, tell me what to do. Have you observed that I leave home occasionally? Yes. In any particular way? Periodically. That is the very thing. You have noticed it, then? My dear Planchet, you must understand that when people see each other every day, and one of those two absents himself, the other misses him. Do you not feel the want of my society when I am in the country? Prodigiously, that is to say, I feel like a body without a soul. That being understood, then, proceed. What are the periods when I absent myself? On the 15th and 30th of every month, and I remain away, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and sometimes 4 days at a time. Have you ever given it a thought why I was absent? Oh, to look after your debts, I suppose. And when I returned, how did you think I looked, as far as my face was concerned? Exceedingly self-satisfied. You admit, you say, that I always look satisfied, and what have you attributed my satisfaction to? That your business was going on very well, that your purchases of rice, prunes, raw sugar, dried apples, pears, and treacle were advantageous. You were always very picturesque in your notions and ideas, Planchet, and I was not in the slightest degree surprised that you had selected grocery as an occupation which is of all trades the most varied and the most pleasantest as far as the character is concerned, inasmuch as one handles so many natural and perfumed productions. Perfectly true, monsieur, but you are greatly mistaken. In what way? In thinking that I'd leave here every fortnight to collect my money or to make purchases. Ho, ho! How could you possibly have ever thought such a thing? Ho, ho, ho! And Planchet began to laugh in a manner that inspired D'Artagnan with very serious misgivings as to his sanity. I confess, said the Musketeer, that I do not precisely catch your meaning. Very true, monsieur. What do you mean, very true? It must be true, since you say it, but pray be assured that it in no way lessens my opinion of you. Oh, that is lucky. No, you are a man of genius, and whenever the question happens to be of war, tactics, surprises, or good honest blows to be dealt with, why, kings are marionettes compared to you. But for the consolations of the mind, the proper care of the body, and agreeable things of the like, if one may say so, monsieur, don't talk to me about men of genius. They are nothing short of executioners. Good, said D'Artagnan, really fidgety with curiosity. Upon my word, you interest me to the highest degree. You feel already less bored than you did just now, do you not? I was not bored. Yet, since you have been talking to me, I feel more animated. Very good, then. It is not a bad beginning. I will cure you. Rely upon that. There is nothing I should like better. Will you let me try, then? Immediately, if you like. Very well. Have you any horses here? Yes, 10, 20, 30. Oh, there is no occasion for so many as that. 2 will be quite sufficient. They are quite at your disposal, Planchet. Very good. Then I shall carry you off with me. When? Tomorrow. Where? You are asking too much. You will admit, however, that it is important I should know where I am going. Do you like the country? Only moderately, Planchet. Is it the case that you like town better? That is as may be. Very well, I am going to take you to a place half town and half country. Good. To a place where I am sure you will amuse yourself. Is it possible? Yes, and more wonderful still, to a place from which you have just returned for the purpose only, it would seem, of getting bored here. Is it to Fontainebleau you are going, then? Exactly, to Fontainebleau. And in heaven's name, what are you going to do at Fontainebleau? Planchet answered D'Artagnan by a wink full of sly humor. You have some property there, you rascal? Oh, a very paltry affair. A little bit of a house, nothing more. I understand you, but it is tolerably enough after all. I am going to Planchet's country seat, exclaimed D'Artagnan. Whenever you like. Did we not fix tomorrow? Let us say tomorrow, if you like, and then, besides, tomorrow is the 14th. That is to say, the day before the one when I am afraid of getting bored, so we will look upon it as an understood thing. Agreed, by all means. You will lend me one of your horses? The best I have. No, I prefer the gentlest of all. I never was a very good rider, as you know, and in my grocery business I have got more awkward than ever. Besides what? Why, added Planchet, I do not wish to fatigue myself. Why so? D'Artagnan ventured to ask. Because I should lose half the pleasure I expect to enjoy, replied Planchet, and thereupon he arose from the sack of Indian corn, stretching himself and making all of his bones crack one after the other with a sort of harmony. Planchet, Planchet, exclaimed D'Artagnan, I do declare that there is no sybarite on the face of the globe who can for a moment be compared to you. Oh, Planchet, it is very clear that we have never yet eaten a ton of salt together. Why so, monsieur? Because, even now, I can scarcely say I know you, said D'Artagnan, and because, in point of fact, I return to the opinion which, for a moment, I had formed of you that day at Boulogne, when you strangled, or did so as nearly as possible, Monsieur de Ward's valet, Lubin. In plain language, Planchet, that you are a man of great resources. Planchet began to laugh with a laugh full of self-conceit, bade the Musketeer good night, and went down to his back shop, which he used as a bedroom. D'Artagnan resumed his original position upon the chair, and his brow, which had been unruffled for a moment, became more pensive than ever. He had already forgotten the whims and dreams of Planchet. Yes, said he, taking up again the thread of his thoughts, which had been broken by the whimsical conversation in which we have just permitted our readers to participate. Yes, Yes, those 3 points include everything. First, to ascertain what Baisemeaux wanted with Aramis. Secondly, to learn why Aramis does not let me hear from him. And thirdly, to ascertain where Porthos is. The whole mystery lies in these 3 points. Since, therefore, continued D'Artagnan, our friends tell us nothing, we must have recourse to our own poor intelligence. I must do what I can, mordieu, or rather, Malaga, as Planchet would say. End of chapter 1.